Take 4 or 5.
Good morning. It is Amy Wheeler and Lorelei Warner. And today we're going to talk about the differences and similarities between occupational therapy and yoga therapy, and also talk about how Lorelei combines these two in her work as an occupational therapist who does home health, but she also brings the yoga therapy in. And one of the things that I think is interesting, I've been a kinesiology professor at California State University for 22 years, and we actually prepare undergraduates to go into school for PT and OT. Our major, basically, it's called Allied Health, and it prepares people for OT, PT, physician's assistant, all these different medical careers. And when I talk to young people about yoga therapy and occupational therapy, none of them have ever heard of yoga therapy, but they're all really super interested. And I know one of the things you do, Lorelei, is you take interns that are in school for occupational therapy, and you give them an internship and show them how it is that you work with yoga therapy and occupational therapy, which is so cool. You've been doing this for years now.
Yeah.
So do you want to say a little bit about yourself before we get started so they kind of have a feel for who you are and where you're coming from?
Yes, thanks, Amy. I'm so glad to be here with you. And my mentor, my dear friend, soul sister. Anyway, my background is I'm an occupational therapist for over 25 years. I worked with everything from a 2-year-old to 2-month-old to a 102-year-old, and across the lifespan. And somewhere in the middle of that journey, I found yoga therapy, and I decided to explore that. And I've been studying in our tradition, the Krishnamacharya tradition, Daskachar, and for probably about 15 years now, and working on blending the two. And I have been a clinical instructor for doctoral residents and interns doing their fieldwork education through Northern Arizona University and USC for a number of years, and doing home health and bringing sort of some yoga therapy concepts to home health, and just kind of looking at merging and blending the two.
And that is why I'm so happy to have you on our Optimal State faculty, because when we have fantastic people like you on faculty that have actually seen what's happening in healthcare and what's happening in yoga therapy, and figuring out where the lines are, where they're similar, where they're different, what you can merge, what you can't merge, I just think that is super, super helpful. So What would you say are the differences between occupational therapy and yoga therapy? Because honestly, when I look at all the careers out there that are licensed, to me, occupational therapy looks the most similar to yoga therapy. So what are the differences? And then we'll get into the similarities.
Yeah, that's actually what drew me to yoga therapy, is that it really resonated with my background. Because as an occupational therapist, we look at the whole person, its body, mind, and spirit. Very much like, we're looking at the Panchamaya model, our 5 layers of the human system. It is very similar to that. The way I look at it is think of it like a sea turtle. So it's kind of like there's all this overlap here, but yoga therapy has something that occupational therapy doesn't have, and occupational therapy has a little bit of something that yoga therapy doesn't have, and the blend is so beautiful. So where they're different is that yoga focuses more on the breath and sort of the philosophy behind, with the sutras, and at least from our tradition with the Patanjali sutras. And then occupational therapy, we look at activities of daily living. We look at the environment, and those sorts of things. But there's still, even if I start looking at yoga therapy and I still start looking at occupational therapy, even on those ends where they might not seem similar, they still have similarities, and there's still like essences of either one. So I think the blend is beautiful.
And so tell me this, Lorelei, I've heard some people who have an actual license, meaning they've gone to school after their undergraduate, they've gone to school for 2 or 3 or 4 years to become an occupational therapist or a PT. They've spent $100,000 or more, getting that degree, taking state boards. I mean, it's a big process these days to become a PT or an OT because the standards have gotten so high.
Yes.
And I just wonder, from your perspective, when you look at PT and OT, are you glad that you have the license? Are you glad that you are an OT? Does it open up more doors for you, even though the cost of becoming an OT is so high these days?
Yeah, and that's a really tricky and almost sensitive kind of a question. The licensure obviously opens up the doors to working in hospitals and sort of those kinds of settings. Somehow, some ways in the licensure and insurance regulations and stuff like that can actually be more restrictive. So I have to be very careful about, yes, I can have both perspectives, but I need to be very careful about which hat I have on.
That was what I was getting to.
Yeah. Because am I working as an occupational therapist? If I'm working as an occupational therapist, I have to put my OT hat on. I have to ask about dressing, bathing, grooming, toileting, eating, our activities of daily living. And then I also ask them, because as an OT, what do you want and need to do in daily life? And how can we help you get there? As an occupational therapist, I can put my hands on the person and I can help facilitate. But I have to be within the certain insurance regulations of, if I'm working privately, I have to be within those certain insurance regulations.
And can I say that many times when I talk to you at the end of a long day where you've seen all these clients, you're telling me, oh, and now I have to do all the bookkeeping and record keeping and all that.
Yeah, and the charting is getting, I don't know, it gets harder and harder. It just, there's more and more regulation with it. And I understand the reason for it, and I honor my Western medicine background. I appreciate my Western medicine background very much, and I honor it. But it's definitely, sometimes it feels like it's taken away from what I would like to do to help the person. So, but let's
talk about that, because that's what I know you're really passionate about, is helping people and using these tools you've learned through yoga therapy to really help people over and above and beyond. I mean, what you talk about with the breath work and the visualization and the toolbox that you have from the yoga therapy tradition, that's where I see your magic and your heart and all of these interns coming and wanting to work with you, because you have something that they see is making such a big difference. So tell us about those things.
Right. Well, I definitely, I'm working predominantly home health and private practice. I'm working, but I'll speak more to the home health perspective right now. And when I'm giving them a home exercise program, I have breath with movement. Sometimes I will have sounds, simple sounds. Sometimes I will have simple meditation. So, and the people are resonating with it. I'm not going to, I kind of see where they're at and if they're interested and engaged in it and, welcoming of it. But I would say 95% of the time, at least, it has breath with movement. And these people, it's pretty acute. I mean, if they're in home health, they've just come home from the hospital and they're not ready for outpatient rehab. So they're pretty acute. So I'm having to really modify, but they are doing yoga. No mistake about it. They're doing yoga, but with my OT hat on. So
but literally, you could have someone in a wheelchair, someone who's in bed, and you can actually design like a breath-based practice with maybe gentle movement. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that looks like for you?
Yes, and I've actually worked with somebody on a respirator doing yoga. Inhale, arms up, exhale, arms down, and trying to, work with the respirator and the breath with the movement. So, but some of the exercises that we would do are let's just say, I say exercises. It's asana with movement. Okay. So it's movement with breath rather. But like, say, for example, I will give them a single leg forward bend, inhale, and then exhale forward. and inhale up, exhale forward, the dynamic movement, and then hold. And I tell them how this is going to help them so that they can wash their legs. They can reach further and wash their legs. So sometimes I'll have them do like a seated figure four, like, like external rotation of the hip and a figure four. This is to help you, and inhale up and exhale forward and inhale up. And sometimes it's like little micro movements that can be just like this. And that's like to help you put on your socks. And sometimes I will do like little, what you would think of as a little chair pose. They're little mini squats at the walker. And I tell them, and inhale tall, exhale, coming down, inhale tall, and exhale coming down. So then, and at some point I tell them we're working on sit to stand and be more controlled that way. So, and I definitely do, one thing I think that kind of gets lost in the rehab is the trunk rotation and the side bends and the trunk rotation. And so the twists. And say, for example, and people in a hospital bed, I can do that very easily with them. We adjust the bed, we adjust, and sometimes it's like I said, micro movements, but sometimes it is reaching across and grabbing the railing of the hospital bed on the other side, and that ends up working on bed mobility because they need to be able to turn in bed. It's more than bed mobility. It's all of this stuff is more than the functional movements, because I'm doing breath with movement. So I'm really working at getting in all to the different layers. And then sometimes I'll add in a little visualization or imagery or something for them so that we can I want to work, always thinking about working on the 5 layers of this human system as much as I possibly can. Another one I do is I do what I call morning greeting. So they'll inhale up and exhale, and they put their arms behind their back, and then inhale up and exhale, arms in front again. And now we're working on range of motion in the shoulders to reach behind for toileting hygiene or managing your pants and things like that. So there's a lot. That's just the asana side of stuff.
And that's what I wanted to talk about. So far I have people ask me this all the time. If I've been trained as a PT or an OT and I take a 200-hour yoga teacher training, doesn't that make me a yoga therapist? And some might say that what you've described so far, if you took the correct 200-hour program in a tradition that's very gentle, breath-based, simple movements, that maybe that could work. But, as yoga therapists, we know that it goes far beyond the postures or even the breath. It goes into the mental states, the personality, the spirituality, the emotions, and all of that we base on Patanjali's Yoga Sutra,
right,
and some of these ancient texts. And we literally wear the lens of a yoga therapist and not necessarily an occupational therapist or PT.
Right.
So, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think when I first did my 200-hour training, I think I looked at yoga as, I'm going to use these movements and these postures to get at helping people be a little bit more mobile. Thank goodness my 200-hour training was in our tradition, because it led me down this road toward yoga therapy. And, I have taught and I do teach classes from time to time, but predominantly I'm teaching one-on-one so that I can watch the breath. I'm watching the breath. I'm watching their emotion. I am watching their behavior. I'm watching the way they move. I'm working to observe them on all 5 layers of the system. And I have to be really super focused on that person at that time. I can't, a whole classroom full of people, I won't be able to do it. And our tradition and the yoga therapy perspective and the hours, that through the OSO trainings, the optimal state of living trainings, those really have helped me to move beyond just the physical layer of the system and really look at the whole person. And that is the richness of yoga therapy and occupational therapy. That's the richness of it, and the depth of really getting at change in people's lives. And that's what really I think has been my passion, is just, I see it's not just about 10 reps of this or whatever. There's so much more to helping someone make the changes in their life, make real changes in their lives. And it's been my driving force. And thank goodness I found you an Optimal State of Living, because it's really helped me to shape that kind of a view. And
I think, just to finish here, I think people underestimate the potency of these 2,000-year-old teachings and how they help us look at the human system. Number one, how long it takes to learn that framework, that lens that you put on, and then get good at observing people on all these layers. Like it's really not just your Western training plus a little bit of asana or even breath. No. There's a whole paradigm shift of how you observe and interact with a human being that comes from 2,000 years ago. And I think people maybe underestimate sometimes how long that takes to really absorb that into you and be able to use that ancient philosophy. Yes,
and it takes practice, and I this is a lifelong journey. I know it's a lifelong journey, and just being able to sit back and understand and see each layer more clearly the more I study and the deeper I study, and how they really intertwine, and how I can work on one certain layer of the system. I can work on sound and breath work, and it could be, maybe just, kind of complementing with a speech therapist or something, just, to help somebody, or use their breath to help getting up and get moving. But seeing how all these tools can actually help filter through the different layers. And so it really is, I'm glad I found a place to keep going and depth to keep going at it. So
tell me, Lorelei, because we're going to try to do a Facebook Live this morning too. That's why I'm kind of rushing through this.
Yeah.
Tell me, your dream, you live in Ventura, and you have this beautiful new space that you've been working to rehab. And I'd just like you to, maybe in 2 minutes or less, tell us what your dream is and what you're doing there. Because I think the more people hear about others who have dreams like this and are moving forward, the more they get inspired to do it. So can you tell us about your dream and what you're doing?
Yes. It's called Wellness Arts Village. And it started about 15 years ago. I just had this dream. I wanted to blend Western medicine with complementary techniques, with a focus predominantly on yoga therapy and our tradition, but I can integrate some more. So the idea is to bring like-minded Western therapists together with the complementary, of people who have experience in complementary techniques, and then also incorporating the arts for wellness. So that's the intention behind Wellness Arts Village. And then I have the integrated wellness therapy kind of philosophy, if you will, which is, again, it's looking at the whole person. There's a lot of yoga therapy in that, but it's more of a blend. But what I'm doing with Wellness Arts Village, my intention, I bought this old Avenue hardware store on Ventura Avenue. It's a 1929 building, and it's built in, so like I said, built in 1929, but there's a very little infrastructure, beautiful building. So it's going to take me a while to do the build out, and it's a day-to-day lesson in faith. But I just keep leaning into it and keep staying with my studies, and yeah, so that's kind of.
I have no doubt it's going to work for you. I mean, you have the heart for it. You have the faith. So,
yeah. Thank you.
Let's finish this up. Thank you so much. And we're going to try to go Facebook Live right now, but and we'll still have this one to plug in there. I'll put them both up anyway. So.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you.
All right, we'll talk soon. Bye.